He laughed. He actually laughed. Standing in front of a room full of combat sports enthusiasts, a decorated Russian martial arts instructor waved off the question about Filipino Arnis like it was a joke someone had told at the wrong party. "Sticks and knives," he said, smiling. "That is not fighting. That is dancing." What happened in the weeks that followed would force him to rethink everything he thought he knew about combat, tradition, and respect. For centuries, the Filipino martial art known as Arnis, also called Eskrima or Kali depending on the region, has been a living, breathing system of combat that predates many of the world's most celebrated fighting traditions. It is a system so efficient and so deeply ingrained in Filipino culture that it became the national martial art and sport of the Philippines by official government declaration in 2009. Yet despite this recognition, Arnis has long been dismissed by practitioners of other styles, particularly those rooted in European or East Asian combat traditions, as something rustic, primitive, or theatrical. That dismissal has a cost, and sometimes that cost is paid in front of a camera. The Russian instructor, a former military combatives trainer with credentials in Eskrima and Sambo, had been invited to a multidiscipline martial arts symposium held in Manila. He was articulate, physically imposing, and clearly experienced. When a Filipino attendee stood up during the open forum and asked him what he thought about Arnis as a practical combat system, the room went quiet. His response, captured on video by a participant, was condescending in tone and dismissive in content. He suggested that weapons-based arts built around rattan sticks and bladed tools were museum pieces with no application in real confrontation scenarios. The clip spread rapidly across social media platforms. What the Russian instructor did not know, and what the video does not show in its opening moments, is that seated in the third row of that same symposium was a 60-year-old Grandmaster named Edmundo Rosal, a name that carries enormous weight in the Filipino martial arts community. Rosal had trained under some of the most respected lineages in the Visayas region, had taught law enforcement personnel across Southeast Asia, and had spent the better part of 4 decades refining a fighting philosophy that blended practical eskrima with real-world self-defense application. He had heard comments like this before. He had also responded to them before. Rosal did not react immediately. He waited. He listened to the entire forum, asked 2 quiet questions of his own, and then, as the session was ending, approached the Russian instructor with the kind of calm that only comes from absolute confidence. He introduced himself, acknowledged the man's credentials genuinely, and extended a simple invitation, a friendly demonstration, no competition, no ego, just 2 martial artists exchanging ideas. The Russian instructor, perhaps expecting a light technical exchange, agreed without hesitation. What followed was not a fight. Let that be absolutely clear, because this is where many retellings of the story get sensationalized beyond what actually occurred. What took place in a small training room later that afternoon was a structured demonstration of Arnis principles against a resisting, skilled partner. Rosal began with something deceptively simple, a single rattan stick, mid-range engagement, controlled strikes to targeting zones that would incapacitate in a real scenario. Within the first 2 minutes, the Russian instructor's expression had shifted from mild amusement to visible concentration. He was working hard just to track the angles. Arnis is built on a concept called defanging the snake. Rather than going immediately for the body of an opponent, an Arnis practitioner targets the weapon hand, the wrist, the forearm, the elbow, disabling the attack before it can reach its destination. The angles of attack in Arnis are numbered, and advanced practitioners can flow between them with a speed and fluidity that makes defense extremely difficult without specific training to counter it. The Russian instructor, trained in linear and grappling-based systems, kept reaching for a clinch that Rosal denied him every single time by changing range with footwork that seemed almost nonchalant. By the time the demonstration moved into the blade awareness segment, where Rosal used a rubber training knife to illustrate engagement principles, something in the room had fundamentally changed. The other participants had gathered. Nobody was leaving. People were recording on their phones. The Russian instructor, to his enormous credit, stopped mid-exchange and said something that the witnesses in the room would later quote in numerous online discussions. I have been training for 30 years and I did not know this angle existed. It was not a concession of defeat. It was recognition. And in the martial arts world, recognition from a skeptic carries more weight than praise from a believer. The video of the demonstration, posted by one of the symposium attendees, accumulated hundreds of thousands of views within a week. Comment sections across platforms lit up with responses from Filipino martial artists who felt seen, from international practitioners who admitted they had shared the same initial skepticism as the Russian instructor, and from combat sports analysts who began pulling apart the footage frame by frame to examine what Rosal was doing with his footwork and timing. Arnis suddenly had a new global audience, and it had not asked for it. What the viral moment unlocked was a broader conversation about why certain martial arts traditions get dismissed based on aesthetics rather than effectiveness. Arnis does not look the way most people expect a combat system to look. The rattan sticks make a sharp cracking sound that can seem theatrical. The footwork is subtle rather than dramatic. The power in the strikes comes from wrist mechanics and body alignment rather than visible muscle tension. To an untrained eye, it can look like choreography. To someone who has been on the receiving end of a properly delivered Arnis strike, the experience is entirely different. Philippine military and law enforcement agencies have incorporated Arnis principles into their training programs for decades, a fact that often surprises people encountering it for the first time as a competitive or demonstration art. The modern Arnis system developed by the late Grandmaster Remy Presses brought the art to international audiences beginning in the 1970s, and his work planted the seeds for the global practitioner community that exists today. Grandmasters like Antonio Ilustrísimo, whose combat lineage was tested under real conditions rather than controlled settings, demonstrated that the art had a foundation in something far older and more serious than sporting competition. Grandmaster Rosal, in a short interview following the symposium, declined to characterize what happened as a victory of any kind. He pointed out that the Russian instructor had been generous with his time, honest in his reactions, and willing to engage rather than retreat. Those qualities, Rosal said, were actually rare, and the willingness to change your mind in real time is itself a form of martial discipline. He spoke about the Filipino tradition of pakikiramdam, a concept of deep sensitivity and attunement to others, and suggested that it was not just a cultural value but a fighting principle embedded in the way Arnis practitioners read distance, timing, and intent. The irony of the entire situation is that the original dismissive comment, the one that launched 1,000 reply videos and sparked weeks of debate across martial arts forums and communities, ultimately did more for the visibility of Arnis internationally than almost any deliberate promotional effort had managed in years. Search volumes for Eskrima and Arnis tutorials spiked measurably in the aftermath. Schools in Europe and North America reported increased enrollment inquiries. Filipino diaspora communities in countries from the United States to the United Arab Emirates shared the video with a kind of quiet pride that needed no accompanying text. Martial arts have always carried within them the tension between tradition and recognition, between the depth that practitioners know is there and the surface impression that outsiders form quickly. Every art has faced a moment where someone from outside looked in and said, "That cannot possibly be effective." And in many cases, it took a demonstration rather than an argument to shift the conversation. The Filipino martial arts community has had to navigate that tension for a long time, partially because the art's emphasis on weapons makes it harder to showcase in mainstream combat sports formats, and partially because the culture around Arnis has historically valued transmission over promotion. What a 60-year-old Grandmaster accomplished in a quiet training room in Manila was not simply a demonstration of technique. It was a reminder that wisdom does not always announce itself loudly, that the most dangerous practitioners in any art are often the ones who have nothing left to prove, and that dismissing something you do not fully understand is a habit with consequences. The Russian instructor left the symposium with a notebook full of references and an open invitation to return. Whether or not he accepted is a different story. But the fact that he asked for the invitation in the first place says everything.